Good evening, everyone. Hello, my name is Sean Timmons. I'm the managing partner of our Houston, Texas office. I also have oversight over our Austin, Texas operation, which is near Fort Hood. I cover the state of Texas and much of the country, representing individuals coast to coast in all branches of military services. We are going to talk tonight generically about the new Department of Defense directive that everybody on active duty in the reserves and the Guard and DoD employees take the mandatory COVID-19 vaccine and all the legal issues associated with that. There's several legal issues to unpack. We're going to walk through them step by step. Everybody has a lot of questions. I'm certain at the end of the discussion tonight, we'll answer as many questions as possible. Also know, please, that our overview is generic. If you have specific questions that are specifically related to your individual facts, the analysis may change substantially based on your particular individual factual situation. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to my partner in our Buffalo office, and he's also the managing partner of our military practice group with 19 attorneys, Mr. Tony Kuhn. He's going to talk about some of the initial accommodations and waivers that are available, and I'll go into some more specific details, and we're going to have an interactive presentation between the three lawyers here on the webinar tonight. So with that said, Mr. Kuhn, would you please go into the discussion regarding the accommodation and waivers?
Sure. Thanks, Sean. All right. You know, I know it looks like we're up to a little over 120 people here. So that's an indication of how important this topic is and how many questions are out there. So we anticipated a large group. I expected that number is going to grow throughout this webinar here today. Some people are probably still trying to figure out first time they've used WebEx. But, you know, we're going to get right to the question that really is on everybody's mind, and that is, what can you do if you have made the choice to not take the vaccine? Or maybe it is just, what are your options? And that will help you decide whether or not to take the vaccine. So I just want to make clear that this is not this is not going to be a webinar that's politically based. You know, it's not going to be about our opinion as to whether or not you should get the vaccine. I'm not even going to get into my opinion of the vaccine. But I just want you all to understand what options you have, and you know, hopefully we can clear some of these things up for you all. So there are a number of different waivers out there, and this is just generally speaking with regard to any vaccine. So whether we're talking flu vaccine or COVID, you know, obviously COVID is being treated a little differently because it's a pandemic, and you know, some people are very scared about this virus. So they're treating it differently than they might treat flu, for example. But, you know, we don't have a bunch of people dying in the country, at least not reported, from the flu virus right now. So, you know, no surprise, safety first. They're making a big deal out of COVID. So what can you do if you decide that you're not going to take the vaccine? You have a couple of different options. The first, one of the main options that we see a lot is a medical accommodation. Generally speaking, this is for individuals who may have a medical condition that will or could worsen following the vaccine, or it could be individuals who are susceptible to a certain medical condition if they get the vaccine. Really, the main thing that you're going to need to prove that, or to help you prove that, is something from a doctor that says that you are, you know, either at risk of developing a condition or you have a condition that might worsen. You're going to want to tread carefully here, because we all know that if you if you develop a unfitting condition or you disclose an unfitting condition, there's a good possibility that you're going to be separated from the military. You might be eligible for a medical disability retirement. But if it's something that the military, something maybe you didn't disclose to the military, you know, you're supposed to do that. And if you disclose something now that existed prior to your enlistment that you did not disclose prior to your enlistment, you could potentially be facing, anything from administrative separation to court-martial for fraudulent entry. So just keep that in mind. But the best piece of evidence that you can get is something from a doctor. It's almost definitely not going to be your doctor at your TMC, a military doctor. I can pretty much guarantee you that they're not going to tell you that you shouldn't take the vaccine. So if you're looking for that type of medical opinion, you're probably not going to find it on base. You should consider speaking with a doctor off base, you know, somebody who really isn't kind of caught up in the middle of all of this. And the reason this is important, I'll use the Marine Corps, for example, because we're starting to see the policies come down from each individual branch. As we know, DOD said back, I think August 24th, that this is now going to be a mandate, but each branch was tasked with providing, I believe the word was an ambitious policy to get everybody vaccinated, right? So now we're seeing those policies. I believe the Marine Corps policy says that you have to have your medical waiver or accommodation request approved by a DoD doctor or physician. That's true probably for all branches, because somebody's going to have to evaluate your request for an accommodation, and they're going to have a DoD doctor or a military doctor involved in the process anyway. So they just clarify, they just added it in, kind of to make it probably appear like a difficult step in the process. I don't know. I don't really know the reason behind it, but of course you have to have a doctor in your branch sign off on it, or in the DoD sign off on it. So what you could do is you could go to that civilian doctor first. And I'm not trying to give anybody ideas or tell you that this is how you could work the system. I'm telling you, if you have a condition that could worsen, or you think you have, you're susceptible to a condition, and what you could do is you could go to a doctor, discuss your situation with that doctor, and if that doctor agrees with you, they're going to issue some type of medical opinion. Then you bring that medical opinion back as supporting documentation to support your request for an accommodation. And now, guess what? The DoD doctor's stuck in a difficult situation. If they disagree with your doctor's opinion, and they're willing to kind of put their reputation on the line to disagree with that doctor, and you get the vaccine and they're wrong, that could affect their standing as a doctor in the community, could potentially affect their license. So they're going to be a little more reluctant, I think, to deny a waiver if you have some type of documentation from a specialist or from a doctor that can show or help you prove that you have a condition or are susceptible to a condition. So, that's the first big one. That's the medical waiver. And I know Eric has done a ton of research on this, so I'm going to ask Eric if he has anything that he wants to add with regard to the medical waivers or accommodations.
So as far as the medical waivers go, they are recognizing two different types. One is a permanent waiver, which you need a specific contraindication to it. So for example, that would be you're allergic to one of the ingredients in the vaccine, or there's something else in the chemical compound of that that's going to prevent you from taking that vaccine. It's the only time you're ever going to get a permanent medical waiver for the vaccination, whether it's the COVID-19 vaccine or anything else that you're looking to get a waiver for. They will grant temporary waivers based upon certain underlying medical conditions, but those always are going to get reevaluated continuously. So if you're looking for a permanent waiver and looking to remain in service, you're going to need to prove that you're unable to take the vaccine due to some type of underlying medical condition. As far as the other types of administrative waivers go, some services are granting or are claiming that they're going to grant administrative exemptions to the vaccine based upon how close you are to retirement, separation. I believe the general rule right now is about 180 days, and that's with approved retirement or approved separation orders. Now, I know the Air Force, for example, isn't necessarily going to grant a waiver request just based on the fact that you're 180 days out from service. They're going to want a little bit more than that. They haven't exactly pushed down clear guidance just yet. I expect them to do so very soon in the future. I think that about covers that, Tony.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the deadline's been issued for the Air Force. I believe it's November 2nd. So it came down a few days ago. But so that's we touched a little bit there on admin waivers. We're going to jump over to that here in a second, but I just want to make sure we're good to go on medical. Sean, did you have anything that you want to add in there for medical waivers or accommodations before we jump over to admin or religious?
Yes, Tony, thank you. What I've spoken about before with members of the media, you may see it published. If you're in the armed forces and you're on active duty, you've already been vetted for medical qualification and medical suitability. So you're probably going to be part of that population that's considered very healthy. The military weeds out through MEPS 2 out of 3 applicants to say they're medically unqualified or they're unqualified for some other reason in their background. So if you're medically cleared for entry into active service, you're probably going to be considered medically clear for the vaccine, absent specific circumstances like diabetes or some condition that's identified as potentially being worsened by the vaccine. I just use as an example. I'm not a physician. I'm not making a medical opinion or a medical assessment. every physician will need to make that determination. I have spoken to doctors who are in the military, ironically, who are refusing to be vaccinated. So there are medical concerns that are legitimate, but you'll need to find physicians probably outside DOD to write an opinion, and we'll be happy to submit that on your behalf.
Right. Thank you, Sean. Again, as both Cody and Sean have said, we'll open this up to questions, but we want to keep moving because we got a lot of materials to cover, and it looks like, we're up around 140 people now. So moving on to another type. I guess we'll hit on just the general admin waivers. Eric touched on those a little bit, just to kind of add a little bit to what Eric was saying. You could request just an admin waiver. Some branches are saying they're not going to grant them. Others are, it's built into their policies generally. But for some reason with COVID, they're trying not to grant that same admin waiver that they would grant for any other vaccine. So, our recommendation is that you proceed, submit your request, even if the guidance for COVID alone is that they're going to handle your request a certain way. I know there's been a lot of speculation. We've obviously spoken with hundreds of service members who have very legitimate concerns about this vaccine. And some of them have told me things like they were told their JAG is going to shoot them all down. Well, guess what? Your JAG doesn't get to decide whether you get the waiver or the accommodation. So don't believe the hype. You use your process, use your due process, use the channels that you're permitted to use if you decide that you're going to pursue some type of accommodation or waiver. And if you're close to EAS or ETS or close to retirement, I think some branches, their general policy is 90 days. As Eric said, they're probably going to grant some out to 180 days. And then other branches are going to try to not grant any at all. So we expect that this is going to be messy across the board because, DOD is not really putting out a bunch of clear guidance, especially with regard to how people are going to be handled if they deny or if they refuse to take the vaccine. So we'll get to that in a minute, but let's jump over to talk for a minute about religious accommodations or religious exemptions. And, much like a medical exemption, probably your strongest evidence is going to be from somebody who is involved in the church or in your religion. I want to be very clear here that there is no right or wrong religion. You don't have to be a Catholic. You don't have to be a Christian. That's not the way religious accommodations work. So whatever your religion is, if you have deeply held religious beliefs that cause some type of issue for you or conflict, then you should consider doing a religious accommodation. I've gotten calls. I'll tell you that I got a call from actually a parent not too long ago who wanted me to tell that individual what the religious accommodation should be and what they should argue. That's not the way it works. Attorneys aren't going to tell you, what story you should make up. But what we'll do is we'll help you if you feel like, for whatever reason, maybe because of the fetal cell lines, which is a very common concern. If you feel like that is a concern for you and you're strongly opposed to that, then we can assist you in, giving you guidance on how to develop your request. That might be, speaking, if you're a parishioner, getting proof that you're a parishioner. If you're making donations to the church, getting proof of that. Just involvement in your church. Some people, I've had individuals who have gone through seminary, and I've actually conducted consultations with them. A little surprised because they weren't chaplains, but they've done different things because they're just devout in their religion. And if you fall into that category, then you should consider doing a religious accommodation waiver. I want to dispel a quick myth. We'll get to some conspiracy theories here in a little bit, but when you are dealing with the church, we talked about the fact that you could be a Christian, you could be whatever it is. If you are opposed to abortion because of your religious beliefs, early in the process, we had commands coming back to us and saying, we're just going to shoot it down because no fetal tissue, no aborted fetal tissue is used in the vaccines. So that's partially true. It's an issue of semantics. Most of the vaccines do not actually contain aborted fetal cell tissue. All of the vaccines were tested to the best of my knowledge, and we've got a lot of research that supports this. All of the vaccines were tested using the fetal cell lines, which we believe is aborted fetal cell tissue. And that's what the reports that we've developed or researched shows. So we've got a long line of research on this. We do believe that the fetal cell lines were used in the development of every one of the vaccines that are currently marketed. But the only one you really have to be concerned with right now is Pfizer, or they've renamed it, but that's really the vaccine that you have to be worried about. And all of our research shows that those fetal cell lines were used in the development of that vaccine and the testing of that vaccine. So that argument's gone. We can help you support your argument. Don't buy into there isn't any in the vaccine if your concern is whether the fetal cell lines were used or not. So little off track there, but main thing with the religious stuff is you just got to support it. You got to show that you're a devout, whatever it is, you're devout in your religion, and get proof to show that. Eric,
And talk about the mechanics of that a little bit. Generally, like the Army is requiring an endorsement from the chaplain to be attached as an exhibit to your request for a submission for religious accommodation. That's generally within the regulation as it exists already for the flu vaccine and for other vaccination. If you have a religious objection, the chaplain's supposed to endorse and say the chaplain had a discussion with you and they believe that your objection is sincere. That's the end of the discussion. You're not to be interrogated by your company commander or other individuals in your chain of command about the content of your belief or how often you go to church or who you pray to. And they can't mock you either and say, oh, well, the Pope came out for vaccination. Therefore, since you're Catholic and the Pope's getting vaccinated, you're not really a Catholic. Therefore, we're going to just recommend denial. That's impermissible religious discrimination in violation of Army Command Policy AR 600-20. You're not supposed to be mocked for your religious practices. So if you're a Nordic pagan or Greek Orthodox or Buddhist, whatever religious practice you have, under the First Amendment, you have a right to freely exercise that faith. You're not to be interrogated about the content of your faith. Now, the military is not required to give accommodation to every religious practice. So if your religion is, say, cannibalism, obviously that might involve human sacrifice. The military is not going to accommodate that religious practice. However, under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993, if the practice is reasonable and legitimate, they're supposed to require accommodation. Our argument is the vaccination violates the tenets of individuals' faith, maybe their belief in the book of Revelations, maybe their interpretation of the Bible, maybe their adherence to Judaism, whatever it might be. If it violates their personally held belief, it doesn't matter what other members of that same faith believe. What matters is what you believe internally, subjectively. That's not an objective assessment. Nobody's going to go and say, well, Methodists believe this and Lutherans believe that and Orthodox believe this. Therefore, if you don't fit one of the criteria, we're not going to even consider it valid. No, it's, do you, in your individual capacity, in your heart, have a legitimate good faith objection, and you believe taking the COVID-19 vaccine will violate the tenets of your faith? If that's what you personally believe, then you have a good faith religious accommodation request that under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993 generally should be followed and provided. For example, here in Houston, 62 nurses were denied employment because they were terminated after not getting the mandatory vaccine. However, in the notes did mention 9 individuals filled out a request for religious accommodation and were granted religious accommodations because under existing law, their employer was required to grant the accommodation. Why were the other individuals terminated? The argument from the employer is, well, they didn't seek a religious accommodation. We didn't have to grant them any kind of permission or waiver or accommodation because they didn't seek it. So the bottom line is, whether it's administrative, it's medical, or religious, you've got to take proactive steps to affirmatively assert your rights under existing law. The command may come back and say, well, in 1904, the Supreme Court said mandatory vaccination was legitimate within the police power of the state. That's correct. But in 1904, as you can tell, 1993 Religious Freedom Restoration Act did not exist. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act strongly codifies the existing tenets of the First Amendment, which is the free exercise of your faith is not to be abridged. Everybody reads the first part of the amendment, but they forget the second part. There's supposed to be a separation of religious churches and the government officials. There's not to be an official church, but there's also not to be any abridgment of your free exercise of your religion. So unless it interferes with public policy, like the example I provided earlier.
All right. I think you hit it. We got a limited time to get through each topic, so I want to jump over to Eric here real quick and see if Eric, you got any insight on this one as well before we move on?
I'm sorry, Tony, you're breaking up there.
You got any insight that you'd like to add before we move on?
No, I think Sean touched on everything, and I just want to hammer home, guys. It's not what your specific denomination says. It's not what your pastor says. You know, it's not what the Pope says. It's all based on your interpretation of it. And just because, for example, the Catholic Church might tell you to go ahead and get the vaccine, that doesn't mean, you know, one, that you can't be opposed to that vaccination, and two, that your religious accommodation request would get denied based upon that fact.
Touch on one more topic. I know that some religions, the Pope, for example, I believe has come forward and said, you know, I'm tossing abortion out the window for this one, and I'm okay with the vaccine. I'm not surprised, right? You're going to have some individuals who are concerned with getting the virus, and not everybody has to pull back on their beliefs. You know, the Pope has. That doesn't mean that you have to. Even if you are, you know, a devout Catholic, you don't have to, just because one individual said that they're okay with the use of the fetal cell lines. You don't have to also be okay with that. You know, this is an individual choice. You get to choose what you put in your body with regards to these types of accommodations. Maybe not generally, but at least with regard to your religion, you get to request that accommodation, even if, you know, the Pope has endorsed the vaccine. So I just want to clear that up. I know that that's an argument that you know, sometimes these requests are going to be denied, and that's the basis for the denial. So whether we draft the request or you draft the request, that's a topic that you should get in front of in your request, and make sure that you include a section on that, and you know, make sure that you face that argument head on. Sean, I believe you wanted to maybe jump into how to submit the requests, or the different types of potential separations or something, if you want to go ahead and take the lead.
Thank you, Tony. Appreciate that. Yes, the next question logically is going to be, first off, am I required to get the vaccine? Yes, generally are. Under Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the order is technically a lawful order, and you're required to comply. Our position is compliance includes seeking a waiver or an exemption. As long as you're affirmatively seeking that waiver or exemption, our argument is you're in compliance. The military's rebuttal to that is potentially going to be, okay, your request for accommodation or medical waiver has now been denied. Here's your notification of separation. Or worst case scenario, here's your referral of court-martial charges. We're going to allege under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, Article 92, you violated the lawful order by refusing to get vaccinated, and your request for accommodation was denied. That's the thermonuclear worst case scenario. High value targets, such as, say, a Navy captain or an admiral or a general officer or senior colonel, might face an actual trial. In anthrax, individuals were court-martialed, and they were found guilty, and they were confined, and they were dismissed from the service. The Air Force actually dismissed pilots and confined them for becoming an officer and for willful refusal to follow lawful orders. Those cases ultimately were, you know, fully adjudicated, and I don't want to get into the details of any individual case, but that is the worst case scenario. What does that involve? That involves the command actually drafting a charge sheet, serving you with the charge sheet. Then you would be at that time detailed representation from Trial Defense Services or the Area Defense Council for your applicable service. Of interesting note, the military service departments have advised the Trial Defense Services and the legal assistance offices across all branches to provide absolutely no assistance to those on active duty. So if you are going to legal assistance or you're going to the Trial Defense Services and you want advice or assistance with getting a waiver or accommodation, they are under DoD directive to provide no assistance whatsoever. However, if you're criminally prosecuted, they will be compelled to provide you a defense. You are also entitled to have a civilian representative as an attorney at no expense to the government. So you can hire your own private counsel. Why would I hire my own private counsel when I get a free attorney? You're paying for experience, expertise, and, you know, gray hair and wrinkles. You're paying for that extra knowledge. If you're going in for a heart surgery, you probably want the heart surgeon who's more experienced than the brand new graduate out of medical school who just first time they're going to operate on a heart. Naturally, your entire life's on the line. So if you have a court martial, you may want to consider having someone with experience in your corner. Not everybody can afford that. So unfortunately, individuals may get an attorney assigned from the Trial Defense Services, and some of them are pretty good. Some of them don't know what they're doing. It's really hit or miss.
Don, can I just add to that as well, real quick, just briefly?
Yeah, go ahead.
You know, just something to consider. And I'm not anti-JAG by any means. Sean was a JAG. You know, we've got JAGs in our firm who some are still in their reserve status. So this isn't a knock on anybody, but you know, most of the time when you work with the JAG attorney, you're going to get good representation, and the person will work hard and try to win your case. Sometimes it's a touchy situation for some people, you know, and not everybody is morally intact and isn't worried about their OER or you know, pissing off their commander. It's a difficult situation to be in, which is why I said what I said earlier about the difficulty with getting a doctor, a military doctor, a DOD doctor to give you evidence to support your medical request. It's very unlikely to happen. Just consider the fact that it's going to be difficult for an attorney who has to report to their commander who forced them to get the vaccine, you know, and is hoping to get a good OER. It's going to be difficult for them to beat the drum and really go to bat for you. I'm not saying that they won't. It's just is going to put them in a very difficult situation. And of course, you know, not all of them are going to go to bat as hard as they could. So
that's a great point, Tony. That's why I wear this particular outfit instead of a military uniform, because I was called into the office more than once saying, "Hey, Captain Timmons, you're really making the government look bad. Stop doing that." That's sir, that's my job. My job is to advocate for the soldiers. No, your job is to be an effective attorney. So yes, many of the attorneys will be under duress to do a crappy job because that's what they're being wink, wink told to do, even though they'll tell you opposite. And even though the law says opposite, the reality is the commander is writing their OER is the same commander prosecuting you. So do you really trust that system? It seems pretty corrupt. That's my editorial on that. That's not anything officially endorsed by anyone. That's my personal opinion.
And not a shot at anybody personally. It's a system that doesn't make much sense, is what it is.
I agree with you 110% there, Tony. And I think the system is I'm very skeptical of the system. With that said, our job is to go against the system every case we're retained on and fight hard for our clients. So back to the process, there's a 32 investigation, there's a preliminary hearing. That's kind of a joke. The determination will be there's probable cause to pursue a trial. Then you'll have a trial. The trial process involves preliminary motions hearings on Article 39A of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. That involves motions to dismiss by your attorney, discovery battles where, you know, issuing subpoenas to the pharmacies involved here, asking for production of evidence and medical records to potentially show the vaccine was not approved properly by the FDA, therefore it may not be a lawful order. There's many defenses available to try to, quote unquote, get the case tossed on technicalities. Assuming those technicalities don't work and are not effective, then the case will be set for a trial. We're talking several months later. The trial process involves picking a panel, a jury. In the military, they call it a panel. Those individuals, by law, have to be senior in rank to those in the armed forces. So if you're a sergeant, your panel has to, if it's enlisted, it has to be senior NCOs and officers. If you're already an officer, they have to be officers exclusively and officers who outrank you by date of rank. So a captain would have to have probably a majors and above on their court-martial panel. The panel will be tasked to determine if you are guilty or innocent of the charges. The government's going to have a pretty straightforward technical case to say you violated the order and the accommodation was denied. However, the sentence is going to be determined by the panel, and hopefully the sentence would be light, if any. There is movement with the National Defense Authorization Act to short-circuit the court-martial process on mandatory vaccination. It's possible Congress passes a law that says anybody being separated for refusing to take the vaccine is going to be granted automatic honorable discharge. However, that's not in law at this time, and there may be administrative discharges prior to that becoming in the law. Let's talk about the more likely outcome. Court-martials, as I discussed, involve a lot of moving parts. The government has to spend a ton of money. Every court-martial generally has designated expert witnesses. At a minimum, for sentencing, you have to have a physician who's a psychiatrist to provide a rehabilitative assessment. So the government has to hire, outside psychiatrists to write a written report in every court-martial about your redemptive materials. That's a lot of money for outside physicians to come testify. They have to fly them in, they have to put them in a hotel, they have to pay their per diem, they have to pay their medical billing rate. Court-martials are unlikely, too expensive, unless they're a high-value target. The much easier process for the command to whittle down the numbers who are not complying with the directive is to administratively separate them. If you are in the military and you are enlisted and you have less than 6 years of service, and you're notified of written notice of separation, your only real due process is to submit a written rebuttal asking for to be retained or to be granted an honorable discharge. If you are an officer and you have less than 5 years and you're probationary status, and they notify you of separation and they propose a general discharge, it's the same process. You're going to have the opportunity to submit a written rebuttal, and that's it. You'll go up to HRC. You'll be out of the military probably in a few months. If you have more than 6 years enlisted service, or you have more than 5 years commissioned officer service, you are entitled automatically, by operation of law, to a board, a neutral, detached, independent board, to make an assessment and a recommendation whether you should be separated or retained. That's a long, drawn-out process. It requires notification, it requires advance notice of witnesses, advance notice of the evidence, scheduling the board has to convene, they have to have a full day or longer hearing. In the Air Force, it takes an entire week. The hearing has to occur, and then they have to make a vote, and the vote will be either retain or separate. And there's many questions involved in the administrative separation process. If there's a board, the board's going to determine you did or did you not violate the lawful order, yes or no, and if you did, what's the next appropriate disposition? So they could vote, and I could see this happen. They could say, yes, you violated the order, but the next question is, do we retain this person or do we separate them? They could vote to retain you, and then you're being retained even though you're not in compliance with the directive. So it's possible individuals who are close to retirement may go to a board, face admin separation, but get voted to be retained and continue on to serve until they hit their retirement eligibility and then possibly retire. Or they could be voted to separate, and it goes to characterization of discharge, honorable, general, or other than honorable. Another caveat to this board process is if they notify you of other than honorable discharge, you're automatically entitled to a board. However, because of the numbers of individuals who are going to be separated administratively potentially, they're probably not going to do that right off the bat. What they will do, though, is they're probably going to weed everybody out and say, okay, we have 20 people in the formation who don't have the vaccine. The ones we really like, the Ranger, Airborne, Pathfinder, decorated MSMs, multiple medals, maybe they'll recommend granting that individual a waiver. But the ones that are late to formation, who have other demerits, counselings for insubordination or other marks on their record already, they're going to use that failure to get vaccinated along with the other alleged misconduct, and they'll put it all together in one sheet and say, okay, yeah, Mr. Smith, we're going to get rid of Smith because he's always late to formation and he's not getting the vaccine. So we're going to focus our effort and energy on throwing him out. And then, Jones or whoever who they like, they'll probably grant them a waiver and protect them. So they're going to triage everybody's situation formation by formation. They probably aren't going to just automatically throw out 25% of the armed forces. That would be, detrimental to readiness and mobility, and it's going to be catastrophic to our national defense if we remove a couple 100,000 people on active duty. It's possible, technically, but it's highly unlikely. They're going to triage these cases and work on separating individuals target by target. What can you do to avoid being targeted? Get out in front, submit your accommodation request, submit your waiver request, and if you're close to retirement, submit your packet now so you can get out. That covers the administrative process, and additional screws they can put on you. They can definitely make your life miserable by canceling your PCS order, confining you to the installation or the post, and saying your past privileges are now revoked. They can, they can't maltreat you. They can't harass you. They can't make you scrub toilets with a toothbrush. That's not lawful. If they do stuff like that, you have a valid IG complaint. You have a valid request for relief, request for redress under Article 138 of the USMC. So they can't just make you show up at 2 a.m. and cut grass. That would be, arbitrary, capricious, and manifestly unfair and unjust. But what they can do is deny your leave, deny your pass, cancel your PCS, make you work extra hours, make you pull CQ 3 times in a week. They can do stuff like that to make you miserable.
If they can show that it falls within their compelling purpose. So they're, the military is saying that they're doing this in the name of readiness, right? So if they can make an argument that keeping you home from leave is because we don't want you to contract COVID, or forcing you to quarantine when you get back, or putting some type of restriction on your leave, PCS, things like that, they can say that they're doing it, based on their compelling purpose, which is readiness. That's the key.
And it's going to be very difficult to overcome, cancellation of your PCS orders and stuff like that, if that's what they want to utilize in their mechanism of tools to try to encourage vaccination. What they're really doing, I've seen evidence of this already, that they're going to line everybody up and order you to go to a formation and get vaccinated. Your duty there is to notify your command. Look, I'll go wherever you tell me to go. I'll comply with the order, but I'm not going to consent to the needle in my arm because I object and I put in a request for a waiver or accommodation. So I'm not going to allow this to actually occur. Yes, I'll go to the gym or whatever you're telling me to do, but I'm not going to get vaccinated at that particular site. They're going to try scare tactics. They'll load everybody on a bus, drive them down to the gym, have it all set up. But when you get there, don't let the needle go in your arm if you don't consent to the vaccination.
And do that as, Sean, if I could just add, do that as privately as possible. You know, I spent a lot of time as a drill sergeant on the trail, and I'll tell you, you know, I as a drill sergeant, I would not, you know, I march 250 soldiers at a time. And if we're doing something like that, I don't want to be put in a position where I'm in front of hundreds of future soldiers, and you know, some new kid who's been there for a week starts, you know, acting disrespectful and getting mouthy with me because he doesn't want to take the vaccine, because there's probably gonna be some push-ups involved, right? So don't put yourself in that situation. If you talk to somebody that's asking you for advice, don't put themselves in that situation. Be respectful, maintain your military bearing, and be proactive. Don't wait until you're in that situation. You need to be proactive, and you need to do it privately. Don't make a scene, because if you make a scene, your leadership's going to make a scene, and you don't want to be caught up in the middle of that.
Yep, exactly, Tony. You don't want to be hit with ancillary misconduct, such as, you know, dereliction or insubordination or disrespect to senior officer. You want to make sure this is all done officially. That's why having an attorney in your corner really does kind of inoculate you, because you could say, look, my attorneys advise X, my attorneys advise Y. And what I tell my clients when they're interrogated by the command, remember your prisoner of war training. Remember your name, your rank, serial number, and you can talk about whatever you want to talk about other than the issue they're asking you about. So don't get into the weeds on the details of your religious accommodation or medical waiver request. Allow your attorney to do that for you. And then if they ask you questions, to say, well, talk to my attorney. He's advised me not to say anything about it. That protects you from the claims of, you know, insubordination and other allegations and ancillary charges they might try to bring against you. That leads us into the next topic, which, Tony, I think you're going to take the lead on, which is we want to address some of the pretty flagrant conspiracy theories out there. I understand there's a lot of information on the web. A lot of it's not accurate. You're hearing it now from 3 different licensed attorneys. Most of the conspiracy theories have some basis in reality. That's why they're a theory, because they have some legitimate basis, but many of them are faulty, and we're going to address those now. So, Tony, do you want to talk about a few of them?
Yeah, I see some of them flying around already. And, you know, we've dealt with a lot of them. But before I get into that, Eric, did you have anything you wanted to add before we get into the conspiracy theory element of this?
Well, I will say this. I think it's important to remember that, you know, your commanders are people just like you guys. Some of them may be opposed to the vaccines themselves, but at the end of the day, they receive their orders. And the best thing you can do when you're dealing with this type of situation is to remain respectful. You know, for some of you that may have had subordinates underneath you, if they come up to you, you know, and they're looking to get something out of you, whether it be, hey, can I get an easier assignment? Can I get out of this duty? You know, you're typically a little bit more willing to work with them than you would be if they just came up, were disrespectful, called you out in front of somebody. So it's important to keep that in mind.
Great advice. And just, if I could just plug one more thing in there too, Sean talked a lot about the administrative separation process. You know, something to remember is if your command attempts to give you an other than honorable discharge, I hope it doesn't happen, but unfortunately it's going to. There's no doubt in my mind. So if your command tries to give you an other than honorable discharge, don't waive your right to a board. Go to a board, because when you get to the board, you're going to have people like all of us sitting on the board. You know, I'm 25 years in. Eric's a veteran as well. Sean's a veteran. You know, you're surrounded by veterans all day long. And I think if nothing else, most of us believe that you should have the freedom to choose whether you get the vaccine or not. So when you get to that situation, you know, where you're sitting in front of the board, they have to determine 3 things. First, whether you committed the offense you're accused of. You probably did, right? If you disobeyed a lawful order. Number two, whether to discharge you or keep you in, they're probably going to say separate because the individual is not going to get the vaccine and was guilty of number one. Then you're going to get to number three. What's the classification of service? You only got to get 2 of the 3 panel members. So if you get 2 of the 3 panel members who are decent individuals who think that people should have the freedom to choose whether they get the vaccine or not, those individuals are not going to tag you with another than honorable discharge. So don't just waive your right to the board. You might also cause the command, you might call their bluff. If you tell them, no, I think I'm going to make you waste the time and resources in putting together an administrative separation board, they might just come back to you, because this has happened with us plenty of times. They might come back to you and say, you know what, never mind, we're just going to go with the general discharge. And just like that, you got your VA benefits back. So keep that in mind. General discharge, you get all of your service-connected compensation and VA benefits, at least healthcare-wise. Honorable discharge is what you need for your education benefits. So education benefits, if that's not too important to you, then you'll be fine with the general discharge. Just, those are the big differences between the two. Now we're a little behind here, so I'm just going to go through some of these conspiracy theories that we hear a lot of pretty quickly. A big one that I hear a lot of. Well, first, let's talk about the irony of all of this before we get into the conspiracy theories. So the irony is that the military's compelling purpose to force you to get the vaccine is readiness, right? I think the number I saw was 8 total deaths that have been classified as COVID, and the reality is that's probably exaggerated, because if you had a fever, it was COVID for a while. They weren't really sure what COVID was. So I think the number's 8. It could have gone up a little bit, but that's the last number I saw, was 8. Okay, it's a very healthy subset of the population. All you have to do is lose more than 8 people. You got to lose 9 people from the military to say that this had the opposite effect, right? You're going to lose hundreds of people from the military in the name of readiness, which is the irony behind all of this. So you're going to, you're going to reduce the force by forcing a mandate that you think is protecting the force to protect readiness. So it's just ironic to me, but that's where we're at, right? So some of the conspiracy theories that we see a lot of, Comirnaty is not the biotech, the Pfizer biotech vaccine. I get that all the time. These are 2 different vaccines, because on some fact sheet on the FDA site, buried in some question and answer document, they say that they're legally distinct. Because one's FDA approved and the other isn't. That's why they're legally distinct. It also says that it's the exact same formulation and that they're to be used interchangeably. It's the same vaccine. One was the name up until FDA approval. They name it Comirnaty upon FDA approval. They're very clear about it's the same thing, but technically distinct because they have 2 different names. It was called, I believe, Biotech, Pfizer Biotech, something like that up until the approval. Once it got approved, they named the vaccine like they always do. It's not a different vaccine. Sure, it's legally distinct. It's really the same vaccine. That's why it's the same formulation and it's used interchangeably. So that might be, an argument that'll be made in federal court somewhere someday, and it might make a judge think twice before determining that it's the same vaccine, but it's not something that's going to help anybody in a religious or a medical accommodation request. So don't waste your time putting it in there, because you're going to actually chip away at your request. Lose credibility right out of the gate. So it's the same vaccine. So that's the first thing. There's a lot about the emergency use authorization. Somehow people interpret the information on the FDA site to show that the emergency use authorization was continued. It's very obvious in my research and my reading of the FDA website that yes, an emergency use authorization was continued for children aged 12 to 17, because they don't fall under, the normal FDA approval that adults fall under. So there is an emergency use authorization that applies to children ages 12 to 17. The actual vaccine that was approved, that is not an emergency use authorization. That is an FDA approved vaccine. So the military can get away with it. There's questions coming through about, can they force you to take a vaccine that wasn't approved? There's questions coming through right now, the question and answer section about, other potential types of vaccines or vaccines that could have been created using different science and different technology. Guess what? The reality is none of that's relevant. All they need is one FDA approved vaccine. They've got their FDA approved vaccine. That's the one that they're issuing the mandate on. And as far as precedents and history of these types of cases, all they needed was the presidential waiver or the FDA approval. They've got full FDA approval, therefore they can mandate that the force takes or receives the vaccine that they've mandated. So it's unfortunate, but that's what they've chosen to do. There was one other, the manipulates your DNA. I know there's questions about whether the vaccine manipulates your DNA and what it does to you because it's a new technology. I know that there's theories out there that it manipulates your DNA. We're not going to answer any questions about that because we're not doctors. We don't know. We're not, we don't study the genes of the human body or DNA structure. We're attorneys. We make legal arguments. And, if you have any questions about legal arguments, send them or legal issues, and we'll try to answer them. I think that was the only one. Did I miss any of the, Eric? I know you've probably dealt with a couple. Sean, did I miss that?
No, I will say this though. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of conspiracy theories, just a whole bunch of information. Some of it legitimate, some of it not. If you guys are going to go ahead and try to do this thing on your own, just keep in mind that when you are citing to, medical research or any other type of literature, it's got to come from a reputable source. The government's going to go off what the CDC is saying, what the Advisory Committee on Immunization is saying, what respected medical universities are saying. They're not going to go off of, what Jack told you in the bar when you were waiting for your pizza. So just keep that in mind if this is something you guys are going to try to pursue on your own.
And one theory I've heard, it's a conspiracy theory, which may well be true, who knows, but that this is a scam by the pharmaceutical industry to permanently get more revenue for their business, because now by having the mandatory vaccine and the third booster, you're going to need a shot every 6 months for the rest of your life. So it's permanent revenue for the pharmaceutical companies. That might actually be true, but it may not be necessarily the reason why it doesn't invalidate the directive to take the vaccine. So the military may say, okay, every year you're going to have to get the annual COVID-19 shot, same with the flu shot that's given annually. You may think that's terrible, and that's something that you don't want to have a shot every year for the rest of your life to have you'd rather rely on your immune system. That's a personal decision I believe you should have the right to make on your own individual medical situation. But that is one of the theories out there. Other theories on the web about Bill Gates conspiring to depopulate the earth and all kinds of other fanciful theories. I haven't seen evidence to validate the legitimacy of those conspiracy theories. Anything's possible, but we have to stay within the realm of what we can prove and it's admissible in court, and we can use as evidentiary exhibits to validate our case. We have to have credibility when we present our request for accommodation, when we present a request for waivers. If we bring in stuff that's very speculative or simply not something we can prove by any means, then we're getting into an area that's simply, too speculative. You're welcome to have your own independent research and build your own, personal opinions. But from an attorney perspective, we have to have stuff that we can validate with witness testimony, documentary production of actual, producible exhibits, hard evidence. Theories and speculation found on the internet from, different websites, probably not going to be helpful for this situation with the military, especially because the military is going to come in already highly skeptical and very much looking to deny a lot of these waivers. So we want to build the strongest waiver / accommodation request possible. And we want to stay within reputable, quote unquote, reputable sources as much as possible. Last thing we're going to do now, I think we're going to open the floor for some questions. I've tried to answer some of them privately as I've seen them come in. One of the ones that caught my attention was, is the military going to be liable if I'm injured or if I'm harmed? Probably not. I'll tell you the bad news about military liability when it comes to injuries incurred while on active duty. But if the military cuts off the wrong leg when they're operating on you, you're very sparred from getting compensation. You can get VA compensation because you're missing a leg now, and you can get 100% VA rated disability because you're now permanently, unable to walk because they removed the wrong leg. But as far as medical negligence, the doctors are pretty much immunized from that. There simply is no liability for the physicians when it comes to financial compensation available for lawsuits. You're very sparred. There is a new program to submit claims for payment for gross medical negligence, but it's extremely limited. There's a lot of exceptions to it, and it's almost impossible to get any kind of recovery. Ideally, Congress will pass a law to end the fairest bar to medical negligence claims. Congress has not done that, and the Supreme Court has not taken the case to overturn that. So, unfortunately, if you're on active duty and you suffer any injuries from the military medical treatment, if they give you too much Motrin and you have an adverse reaction to it, and it was negligent for them to do that, they're immune from liability. You're not going to get any kind of recovery other than your ability to file a claim at the VA. One of the questions was, what about long-term side effects? Honestly, we don't know the long-term side effects. We haven't had enough time to determine if there was long-term side effects from happening. For example, asbestos exposure, people exposed to asbestos didn't get symptoms for 20, 30 years. So is it possible there's long-term latent side effects to the vaccine? Absolutely possible. What'll happen is eventually the VA may connect a condition and say, okay, you got Parkinson's disease and you had the vaccine and nothing else is different. Okay, we're going to connect your Parkinson's to military service and we'll pay you VA compensation. So if you do develop a condition in the future for a VA disability compensation claim, you may be able to argue the vaccine is the proximate cause of my injury, and I only had the vaccine because I was on active duty and I was ordered to take it. Therefore, I should get a higher disability rating because this new condition came up and there's nothing else connecting it except for the vaccine. That's possible, but that's going to be decades down the road, nothing anytime soon. And I think we've covered most of the questions. Obviously, privately, you can always schedule an appointment to talk to myself or Mr. or Tony or any of our other attorneys. We have a large military law practice group in our firm, and we are answering as many questions as possible privately through individual consultations. We have offices around the country, coast to coast, and we're frequently litigating in military courts all over the country. We're handling as many cases as possible and helping out as many people as possible. And I'm trying to do this as efficiently as possible too, because I know everybody's financial situation is different. And there are other attorneys handling these cases too. So you're always welcome to get other opinions. But our opinion is relatively, I believe, agreed upon. You have a right to object, and you have a right to submit that objection in writing. However, the military may well move to separate you. And the best thing you can do is try to fight back, make sure your honorable service is credited properly. You're not thrown out unfairly. And Tony, anything you want to add to our discussion?
No, I'm trying to knock out as many of these questions with the time we've got left that I can. There's questions about the topic that I brought up, whether it's the same vaccine. And again, like I said earlier, the argument could potentially be won in court. And if the court grants a temporary restraining order or an injunction, they could stop the military from administering that vaccine for a short period of time until everything checks out, and then just go right back to administering it. But again, this is the argument that it's not the same vaccine, even though the FDA says it's the exact same formulation and can be used interchangeably. So that's going to be the government's argument. Obviously, it's the same formulation, can be used interchangeably. The FDA says so. So if the court buys your argument, they might grant a TRO, a temporary restraining order. They might grant an injunction, but the military's eventually going to get community or whatever they want to call it, and they're going to just administer that vaccine. So it might buy you some time, but it's not necessarily going to be a winning argument that's going to stop the mandate.
I would agree, Tony. And under the Administrative Procedures Act, there's a great argument to say the military is not following their own regulations, because one gaping hole is under existing regulatory authority. If you have prior immunity because you already got COVID and you have the antibodies, you should be exempt from the vaccine. Because if you had the flu and you don't need the flu shot if you've already had it. Other examples of that throughout the regulatory guidance. However, with COVID, they specifically removed that as an option. So if you had the antibodies, they're saying we don't care. That's a violation of the Administrative Procedures Act. However, that would require a judge to issue an injunctive relief to stop the mandatory vaccine. As of right now, September 15th, 2021, no federal judge has issued an injunction to stop the mandatory vaccine. So unfortunately, unless a judge does that, that argument has no merit at this time with the military services, because they specifically removed that, which I believe is unfair and unjust and in violation of existing regulations. But that's what they've done, and it's quite tragic. We'll try to answer some more of these questions individually. So as far as, immunity is not really a defense that they're permitting as an argument to avoid vaccination.
Sean, there's a question here about if the waiver gets denied, can they kick me out? even though I didn't refuse the vaccine. So probably not. So what they're going to do under those circumstances, again, you know, the way that you handle yourself in this situation is going to determine your outcome. But almost definitely, if your waiver gets denied, they're going to give you an opportunity. Okay, waiver got denied. Time to shit or get off the pot. You know, take the vaccine or you're out. So you're almost guaranteed to get an opportunity to take the vaccine. You might face some type of, you know, not necessarily a quarantine, but you might have to wear masks or have certain restrictions until you get the response to your request. And then at that time, they'll likely tell you, okay, it was denied. You're going to take the vaccine or are we separating you? That was one of the questions that came through.
Thank you, Tony, for that. There's a lot of other information we probably omitted. Unfortunately, we're limited to an hour at this time.
Sean, let me plug one more in here real quick, because this hits a lot of the people that we represent. So what's the difference between federal employees, DoD contractors? If you're a federal employee, you are mandated. You're required to take the vaccine. And it's a lot tougher as a federal employee to get some type of waiver or accommodation than it is in the military for this type of waiver. You're probably going to lose your job because it's essentially just a term of employment and you can walk away. There's no harm that's going to be caused to you, really. Where a military person could be court-martialed, could face another than honorable discharge or general discharge and may have no choice or opportunity to fight that. So federal employees, it's difficult to get a waiver or an accommodation. If you're a DoD contractor, it's just going to, the employment structure is what's going to determine whether you have to take the vaccine.
Each case is unique with that, Tony. Everybody's situation there might be relief available under certain contractual arrangements, whether they're a union employee or non-union. I would encourage individual consultation for everybody's employment situation. And there is active litigation ongoing with that area. So it's developing. A lot of this stuff, again, tonight, the information we provided is subject to the law as it exists right now and the current political climate and the current developments. If COVID goes away, it's a possibility some of these mandates might disappear. However, it looks like COVID is going to be with us for the foreseeable future. So our analysis is based on the idea that COVID will be around for potentially up to another year or longer. And the government is tightening the screws on the pandemic, trying to force vaccination as a mechanism to cope with the pandemic. Obviously, good faith disagreement with that strategy, and you have a right to object. And we're here to help people pursue their legal options.
And just so you guys are tracking, if you're going to try to do this on your own, make sure it's a very detailed request. A one-page memo is not going to get you an accommodation. You know, I think our memos are 8 or 9 pages, so it doesn't mean yours has to be, but you want to lay out a lot of the research that you've done. You want to lay out really good arguments, and you want to get ahead of arguments like, you know, well, the Pope said you should take the vaccine, right? You want to make sure that you get ahead of all those different arguments that are going to be relied on by your chain of command. So tie that all into one good request, or get some assistance, whether it's us or somebody else, get some assistance doing it, and you know, you'll increase your chances of success.
And you can always modify an existing request that was submitted. You can have it amended and submitted. And you can always supplement with additional evidence or additional documentation. So if you get an endorsement from a bishop or a letter from another physician, you can always add a supplemental exhibit to your existing request and say, I have additional evidence I want considered. And you can request reconsideration of a denial, potentially, up the chain of command. These are going to go up through several layers of bureaucracy until a final decision is issued. So you're going to have a lot of fortitude to keep fighting.
We've got a lot of people on here, so we'll just make this point as well. If you do get separated with, say, another than honorable or general discharge, and guidance comes down that you should have been separated with an honorable discharge, don't hesitate to reach out to file an application at the Board for Correction of Military Records for your branch, because your discharge will likely get upgraded. We do hundreds of those every year. So don't hesitate to reach out for some assistance with getting your discharge upgraded if you are separated with something other than an honorable discharge.
And you may be able to get reinstated if the political climate changes. So the re-entry codes will be negative. So if you want to re-enlist when the pandemic's over, you may need to go to the Board of Corrections to get your re-entry code changed to allow to enlist in the future. We're here to help. Thank you, everyone, for participating tonight. We do appreciate it.
Sean, we got one question just came through from Melanie asking if we will potentially do this for federal employees. Melanie, that is something I will check into because of the participation we've had here tonight, then there's a good possibility that we will, but I'll check into that tomorrow morning. So however you got this invite, stay tuned. You know, if we can put something together, you'll see another one come out here soon.
And feel free to follow us on the web. Things are changing every single day. Case law is developing as we speak. Lawsuits are being filed every day. Activities are changing constantly. So there may be developments that change the analysis as we go forward. You're welcome to follow us on our webpage and on LinkedIn and Facebook and social media, and we'll be publishing as much information as we can make public as possible. Keep in mind, we are attorneys and we have a duty of confidentiality to our clients and their specific factual situation, but we will give as much generic information as possible as we proceed.